joining us now to talk about that and revelations today at hearings involving Homeland Security and the Boston bombing, which you're not going to want to miss, is Susan Ferrechio, who is, she knows it all because she's all over there, and she's the Washington Examiner's chief congressional correspondent. Hey, Susan, welcome back. I don't hear Susan. Are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I do. Okay, cool.
All right.
All right.
Good to be here.
Good. Thank you very much. All right. So let's talk about what John Boehner had to say today. And let me start maybe at the end of Benghazi before we go to what happened yesterday. Where do we go from here? How do we move forward?
That's a great question. I think things were kind of left hanging a little bit. You know, he had this really interesting information from these witnesses to what actually happened that night. And then you have, you know, sort of what happens next. I know that there's going to be more hearings. They're talking about more hearings. But the big question is, you know, will there be a select committee? Will there be any effort to subpoena information from the White House? Today, the Speaker told reporters that he sent a letter to the President telling him that he'd like the White House to release some emails that were circulated the day after the attack, in which a State Department official said that she told the ambassador to Libya that this was a terrorist attack. Now, the White House had that email, State Department had that email, yet a few days later, Republicans said that, you know, the Ambassador Susan Rice, ambassador to the UN, went on all the talk shows and talked about this video and this anti-Muslim video being the cause of a spontaneous demonstration that led to the deaths of 4 people, including the ambassador from the United States. So Republicans really want to get at the bottom of this, but it's sort of this real tough situation because the Speaker of the House has not agreed to a select committee. He's getting a lot of pressure from some Republicans in his ranks to do so, but he's resisted that, and he's, I think, trying to appease them by, you know, being public and demanding these emails, and also just talking about wanting to get to the truth and saying there's going to be more hearings. So we definitely haven't heard the end of this. The question is, how far will the Republicans go in the House? I'm not sure yet. I don't think they really know at this point. We all know in the Senate it's run by Democrats, so they're not going to really, there won't be a select committee in the Senate. If there is one, if there is any real action, it's going to have to be in the Republican-led House, because Democrats are not, you know, you could tell by the tone of things yesterday, Democrats aren't really interested in pursuing this anymore. They feel like, you know, this was did in the past.
Absolutely. I mean,
it's all politically motivated, they feel.
Yeah, and Elijah Cummings saying, you know, everybody's death is a part of life, and another congressman saying that the ambassador knew that there were risks. I mean, I thought that those were horrible things to say. I mean, that latter statement came on a TV show, not at the hearings. But so what is the downside? Why doesn't Boehner, maybe because he's Boehner and he doesn't have it in him, why doesn't Boehner say, you know, hey, this testimony yesterday was bombshell. We found out things that are intolerable. We need to find more. We're going to have a select committee, and we're going to get to the bottom of this, and the administration will be held accountable. Motivate the people out there in America. Motivate the base. And it's a winning issue because most Americans would like to know what happened here. But instead, it's like, oh, yeah, I want the White House to come forward. Blah, blah. I mean, it's the same old, same old. Where's the fire?
Well, I think part of the reason is that the Speaker has always talked about wanting to keep the focus on making it appear that the Republicans are doing all they can to create jobs and to
that worked for Romney, all right, didn't it?
And well, right. So I mean, I get the sense that they're not entirely sure how far they're going to go with this thing either. I know he has already said publicly that he doesn't feel it's reached a level where it's
of a select, necessary.
Now, if the White House stonewalls him on these emails, and then you might see him maybe try to subpoena them. Who knows what you might see. And also, you know, they had that report by the 5 Republican-led House committees.
Yeah.
That lengthy report that pinned some of the blame on Hillary Clinton. So it's not like they're not doing anything, but taking it to the level of select committee, he has resisted so far. I'm not 100% certain he will continue to resist if they feel like it, you know, that it's worth their while. If he thinks it's going to hurt them politically, He's very cautious. He's very risk averse when it comes to that kind of thing, shall we say?
Yeah, well,
so that is how he operates. He
I know.
hasn't changed much.
I know, and it's so aggravating because I don't know if you would agree with me, Susan, but I think if you took a poll and you asked the American public, do you want to get to the bottom of who was responsible and what happened in Benghazi? I think a majority would say yes. The media will never be on your side, but the media will never be on the Republican side. So if he's going to watch that, then you're never going to get anything done. But I think America, I think he's misreading it like they misread abortion and everything else when it comes to the left's radical policies. If they would take on those radical policies, they would win because most Americans are mainstream or conservative on these issues. But, the Republicans throw up their hands and say, oh, no, we can't rock the boat.
Well, part of it, too, is that may be true if you were to ask people, do you want to get to the bottom of Benghazi? But then ask the question a different way. Say to the public, what do you want Congress to be working on right now? Well, the number one and number two things don't have anything to do with Benghazi. They are, we want you to find jobs for us, and we want you to do something about our debt and deficit. And Republicans are keenly aware of this, and that is why you see Boehner putting the focus on exactly that and being wary of trying to draw too much attention to something that we all know the media and Democrats will portray as a political witch hunt.
Right. All right, we're talking to Susan Ferrechio here on the Steve Malzberg Show. There were hearings today in the Homeland Security Committee, and I want to get to Cut 52 here, Will. I want you to hear Mike McCall, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, talking with the Boston Police Commissioner, Edward Davis, about the Boston bombing case and the revelation that the FBI did not tell Boston police anything about their interview with the older terrorist brother who's dead, and the fact that they interviewed him at the behest of Russia. And here's the Q&A of Cut 52.
You knew of a Russian intelligence warning that this man was an extremist that may travel overseas, and the fact that he did travel overseas and came back into the United States, would that may not have caused you to give this individual a second look?
Absolutely.
And that was absolutely, and he said that was after he kind of downplayed and said, I can't say for sure if we would have done anything different or whatever. But this was pretty stern and absolute in saying absolutely. And I'm shocked. Maybe I shouldn't be that the Boston police. I can't imagine the FBI interviewing someone here in New York or keeping an eye on somebody and not telling Ray Kelly and the NYPD.
It's really interesting, and part of what was disturbing about all this is that the Boston Police Commissioner said that they've got their own joint terrorism task force based in the city, and it's a 4-person task force who have access to all the database information that you would need in order to find out if they need to be watching someone. And there was nothing in that database that signaled this guy had to be watched, the older brother, and Tamarin. So it wasn't even in the database. So it calls into question this big database that was created and put together in the wake of the September 11th attacks in 2001 that was aimed at preventing exactly this kind of problem, which they call, the stovepiping, where each agency has its own information, its own pipeline, but they don't connect. And that's what a lot of what was taught. There were two layers to this. There was what seemed to be inadvertent lack of connection between the agencies where the system just isn't working. Then you saw sort of thing where people just weren't using what would seem, as the lawmakers described it, is just seemingly defying logic. Like the FBI, why not just call up the Boston police and why not alert them to this guy if you've got another country, Russia, warning you that they believe Tamerlan Tsarnaev is being radicalized somewhere in Chechnya, and he's coming back to Boston. And then further evidence of this was that they didn't find out about these guys and who they were until almost 4 days after the bombing.
Right.
The FBI, they were looking for these guys, and still the FBI, no contact about this guy. And then when they learned in Boston, the FBI learned that these bombing suspects were planning to go to Times Square and do the same thing following the bombing. They didn't call the New York City police or the New York City officials to tell them what was going on. So it really looks bad in terms of, the communication both before and after this bombing. And I don't think anyone walked away feeling exceedingly confident that something like this can be prevented in the future. what you heard from Democrats today was, first of all, they were a lot more sympathetic to the situation and saying that they agreed that there were problems. But they also talked about the need for more funding and the fact that they believe that Republicans have tried to cut back on critical funding that's needed to build these networks and ensure that the training is put in place to respond afterwards if there's a kind of attack like this again.
Right, that's
and
the same thing they're
before.
saying about the security for the embassies, that the Republicans wanted it out, but there was no budget passed with those cuts. There was no bill signed into law with those cuts. That's just Democrat talk, I guess. But let me ask you about this report in the LA Times, and I don't know if this emanates from the hearings today. 5 days before the bombs went off at the Boston Marathon, an intelligence report, 18-page report written by the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, a command center funded by the Department of Homeland Security, identified the finish line of the race as, quote-unquote, an area of increased vulnerability and warned Boston police that extremists may use small-scale bombs to attack spectators and runners?
It's really incredible. And again,
what is that about?
It was written by this Boston Regional Intelligence Center, and it's funded by Homeland Security, by the Federal Homeland Security, and it's dated April 10th, and it just also says, though, it also includes the fact that they don't have any credible or specific info about a threat. It sounds like they said they listed it as place you had to be careful about. Now, I also know that they initially screened that area at the beginning when the initial finishers came in. And I always kind of wondered about that because I remember hearing initially that they were screening people who were sitting right at the finish line at the beginning. Like, I think it was a VIP area.
Right.
And that probably broke up later because, the main finishers were gone and we were getting toward the end of the race. Once you're past the 4-hour mark, you're dealing with the more amateur runners.
The stragglers, yeah.
Well, they don't want to be
I'm kidding.
I watched some of these people come in.
I know. I couldn't run a marathon. I'm only kidding.
Yeah. Anyway, so there you have it. Why? The question is why? Why wasn't there screening all day? I mean, we all know there will be now, but it just, again, this is a soft target. It was crowded with people. The main event was over. The police the bomb dogs were gone and the screening was over.
Yep. No. Anything about the supposed, I don't know, dry run or practice or practice drill? People would say that they were told that it's only a drill when the bombs went off, or that they were going to plan some kind of drill on the roof or something. Or do you ever hear anything about that at the hearings at all?
What they talked about today mostly was, what was going on. Like, who was talking before? What were they hearing before? What were they hearing in the days right after? And how they came to discover the identities of the two bombing suspects. And then they also talked about emergency responders and the kind of resources they need for training and equipment in order to, they believe they, saved lives just because of the training and the money that they had. And I think what you leave the hearing wondering about is, what are they going to actually do here? I mean, nobody's talking about anything. They just sit there and kind of shake their heads and say, boy, we have to do something about this. Let's not cut any funding. But again, the stovepiping, no one's been able to solve this problem. I mean, if they didn't, Joe Lieberman, the former.
I was just going to ask you. We're talking to Susan.
Yeah,
we're talking to Susan Ferrechio of the Washington Examiner, chief congressional correspondent. Not to change the subject, but before I forget, and I'm glad you. I was just going to. I wrote down Joe Lieberman before you said his name. I heard a soundbite with him where I wouldn't say he was blaming the spectators for what happened, but he kind of said, hey, if you see something, you got to say something, and people should have spoken up. And I'm thinking, what were they supposed to say? Somebody put down a backpack? I mean, I don't know. He seemed kind of harsh on the people. No, did you get that impression?
But he also, that's true. But he also was really he pulled no punches when he talked about the breakdown of communication.
Oh, good.
And he came right out and said, basically, he said this whole thing could have been prevented if this problem with the stovepiping of information, and if they'd followed through. The FBI had him, as he said, and this is a quote, he was on their radar screen, and then he wasn't. They just decided, okay, So there were two problems with the FBI. Not only were they not telling anybody else, but what they learned, they just kind of gave up on the guy and didn't follow through after that. So it does beg, raises this question about how many others out there are they not.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Got to be concerned. Well, Susan, a pleasure talking to you. We thank you for your time. We'll speak to you soon.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Susan Ferrechio, ladies.